Well, okay, let's get rolling here. So, welcome to you all. Matt and I are absolutely delighted and thrilled that you joined us today. And we want to give you a little backstory on how we got here so that you understand we didn't just pop up out of nowhere. About a year ago, Matt and I, and actually Melanie and some other people who might be joining us, are in a joint venture group, international. And Matt gave a great 15-minute presentation on influence and how to use the influence principles that have been out there for almost 40 years now. But the twist on it was Matt presented it in a way that rarely have I seen presented it. He really worked on talking about how to use these as levers to better protect yourself against unscrupulous marketers. And he taught a little bit about how to use them to your greatest advantage, not as weapons against people, but as levers to help people get what they want. And interestingly enough, I've been a fan of these levers, these principles for 40 years, been teaching them and using them. And I jumped into the conversation. I said, hey, Matt, did you ever hear Dr. Cialdini, who originated these principles, talk about smugglers? And he said, no. I said, well, a lot of people in marketing have taken these principles and they've used them less than ethically. And Dr. Cialdini actually called these people out and he named them. And he said they were smugglers. Well, when Matt heard that, it kind of put a name to what he'd been railing against for years. And we got to talking. And over the past year, we've been having conversations about, well, what can we offer as a genuine alternative to the marketing tactics and principles that have been misused in the marketplace, and give people some idea as to how they've been used against them, and to be able to harness them not only for your best interest, but for the highest and best of your customers, your clients, your audience, your patrons, whomever it is that you want to build relationships with. So we said, well, what could we do? Well, we put together this little briefing, if you will, and essentially we'll kind of go into three parts, okay? And as a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes, I didn't invent it, but I pretty much popularized it, is that big doors swing on little hinges. And little hinges, a word, a phrase, a question, something small can open up a big door of opportunity. And throughout my 44 years, I've always looked for the little hinges that can open up big doors of opportunity. So we're going to give you a lot of little hinges. So pay attention because some of what we talk about today is everything is universal, but we're going to intersperse some real nuggets. And the first one I want to share with you before I turn it to Matt is that when your buyers go through a cycle, they call it the customer journey, but it's really a buying cycle. And I coined that phrase 35 years ago. And there's three phases. And right now, you are in one of these phases. All right. Phase one is you're satisfied with everything the way it is. And when you meet a person who's satisfied, they are in no state of mind to buy anything new. Those people you want to educate. Okay. And then when people become dissatisfied, they feel there's something more, there's something better, or they're not getting as much as they could. They become dissatisfied and they start to look for solutions. With that person, you look for what is motivating them. So that person to motivate. It's not until the third phase that people move into what I call ready that you activate. So educate, motivate, activate. And then once you get activation, that's the trigger for transformation. So you could gain all kinds of education and it won't lead to transformation. And we've all done that. You could be motivated as ready to charge, but if you don't charge, if you don't do something, you don't get the transformation. It's when you get to that state of readiness, I'm ready to make a change, that you have a real buyer. So wherever you are in that cycle is okay today. We're going to give you a lot of education, a good deal of motivation, and then you will determine for yourself if it's in your best interest to go to activation and start the process of transformation. And to do that, we'll show you what we're going to introduce that might help you and shortcut your process. So that's how we kind of got here today. I'm going to turn it over to Matt to kind of give a little more of a background, and then we'll kind of jump into the education part of our presentation.
Yeah, that's the part I want to be. I'll sprinkle in a little bit about how we got together throughout the talk, but the main focus was right there when Mitch said he had interviewed Cialdini, and I was like, what did he say? Because it seemed like such a missing piece that I knew that what I've been taught in the digital marketing world isn't how the principles were taught. I met Cialdini in 1989. I knew his work, and it didn't feel right, but I never did anything about it. I just kept using the same, what we'll be calling the smugglers weapons later on in the call, but I kept using them in different combinations. And why isn't this working? And then it just finally dawned on me, wait a minute, I remember Cialdini. I know how to do this correctly, but I didn't see Cialdini himself mentioning this until I met Mitch, and he said, oh, by the way, I interviewed him 2006, was it? 2011?
2008, I think it was, when he came out with the book, Yes.
Yes, and that's what it was. So he mentioned the word smugglers of influence, and everything just fell into place since then, and it really added some clarity. And so that's what Mitch and I are doing, kind of filling that gap. Dr. Cialdini knows his principles are being used incorrectly, but he's a researcher. He's doing research. He's doing his studies. He's not really, following through on helping those who have been using these weapons of influence rather than levers of influence. That's the big point.
So, ready to kind of jump right into the heart of the matter here?
Yeah. Why not? So there we go. We're going to be talking about getting your audience to yes. That's the theme here, how to move your people along. And that's a major theme here, rather than use weapons of influence on your people, using the levers to move your people. So Mitch, I don't know if you want to kick off here with why are we here?
Mess up. Okay. We want you to think about why you're here. One of the most important phrases I developed and I use with clients, with anybody I meet, is why, and why are you here now? Okay. So think about what got you here. And as I said, our purpose is to motivate you, to educate you, but most importantly, is to get you to a place where you really make an evaluation. Is it time for me to do something different? And again, we call that activate. And so in that process, we're going to talk about how you can actually utilize the very principles, if you want to call them levers, all right, and not be subjected to smuggling, whether you're on the receiving end or in any case, which I certainly know you would never do this intentionally, but a lot of people were taught how to use these triggers. And if you're taught by people who are not using them as ethically, effectively, and professionally as they could, you might be using them unwittingly, unknowingly, unintentionally. And we want to bring them to your attention so that you never kind of isolate those levers, and that you start to actually use these and look at which ones of these you are strongest in. And very often, what I observe, having now trained literally 1 million people, is that very many people undervalue their own influence. All right. You don't bring out the influence, what we call the influence quotient, or your influence mastery, where you actually use what you have. And so we want you to uh, diminish those things. Like, don't worry about trying to strengthen your weaknesses. If you try to strengthen your weaknesses, you are likely to weaken your strengths. So we're going to look at those levers that you have naturally, organically, and say, oh, how can I press these levers or pull these levers to get people to yes? And so where are we going? We're going to introduce you to the smugglers. We're going to introduce you to another influencer called the Bungler. And then we're going to introduce you to the master of all, the detective, and make a case for why you want to become a detective, because essentially by becoming a detective, you get your audience to yes ethically, repeatedly, and you become a master of true influence. And at the end, we're going to tell you about our solution in terms of being able to facilitate, guide you, assist you, support you, and propel you to becoming a true influencer. We're going to actually, you're going to be the first to hear this. We're announcing our detective school. And the purpose of detective school is essentially to master your influence and really become a detective of influence. And at the end, we're going to invite you to enroll. And if it's right for you, well, that's up to you. And so why would you want to become a true influencer? And we talk about true as opposed to maybe false. I believe you've all been around long enough to see the difference between ethical influence that works on your behalf and what we'll call false influence or contrived, where it's really fabricated, where it doesn't exist naturally. And so these are 6 things that will encourage you, maybe inspire you to become an influencer. Get your audience to say yes. That's really what we want to do. But we don't want to push them. We don't want to convince them against their will. We don't want to twist their arm. All right. And if you do this consistently, you're going to increase your sales ethically, naturally, and consistently. You're going to have people respond positively to you, as you're going to be more confident and comfortable in selling whatever you sell, whether it's a product, a service, an issue, a cause, whatever it is you're selling. And avoid looking and feeling salesy and desperate, or salesy and fake. Nobody wants to look fake. And the great thing about this is once you understand and you're aware and you're alert, you're going to be able to immediately spot when people are trying to smuggle you, or they're trying to use the influence principles and tactics as weapons rather than as levers. And maybe most of all, you will become indispensable and irreplaceable. I wrote a book called The New Game of Selling. And in The New Game of Selling, I say that in today's market, you're going to be indispensable and irreplaceable, or you're going to be irrelevant and obsolete. And we don't want you to be irrelevant and obsolete, and certainly not be using what we consider to be obsolete weapons against people.
Yeah, and we're going to give you an example too, Mitch and I, in social proof, because that issue about recognizing when others are using this on you. Part of detective school is knowing when somebody else is using these influence tactics. We'll use a popular strategy used by the smugglers that worked on me, cost me $1,995 to learn that lesson, but we'll show you that example here soon as well.
So let's move on.
Right.
All
And
right. Matt, you want to cover this?
well, yeah, we'll mention this as again another strategy to use. We bring it up here now because many of you, when you registered for this webinar, were asked three key questions. Thank you for filling that out. And we use these results. You saw that earlier. That's one of the strategies. But these bullets here represent what you wanted. We asked you before the event, before this camera turned on, what would make this totally worth your time? And these were the top 7 answers as well. So this gives you a good sense of who else is in the room, what they're looking for in today's briefing as well.
Yeah, and as we're going to kind of develop this as we go along, there's 2 parts to the detective school or being a detective. One is being a detective. Another is gathering intelligence, and the better ways to gather the intelligence so that you can give people what they want and not give them what they don't want. And it gives you a sense of what they're here to get. And as we go along, you'll start to see that by shifting from the way you're doing things now, if you're not really a full-blown detective, as you see you move into the detective category, these things all become possible for you. Okay.
Yes. So, well, we've already kind of hinted around a lot of these keywords, smugglers and bunglers and such, but I thought we should start with the marketer's formula. And many of you are familiar with those terms: reciprocity, liking, authority, social proof. We're told this is what you need to do to sell somebody. If you're not familiar with those terms, we put a little sketch of some examples. You go into a webinar and someone will say, here's my backstory. I was once, broke and depressed and overweight, but then I discovered they're using some of these principles, the principle of liking to show that they're similar to you, the principles of social proof. Hey, look at all these people that bought my stuff. So this is what we all know is the marketer's formula. You'll see this at any kind of sales event where they use scarcity and urgency and particularly bonus stacking. The problem with this formula, as it's been called, Mitch, we're gonna say
you kind of blew past the bonus stacking. I want to make a comment.
Oh, that's one of your favorites, isn't it?
Yes. Could you go back to this? Okay.
Sure.
Years ago, when in the early days of marketing, my early days in the 1990s, there was something called the thud factor. All right. Some of you are around long enough to remember the thud factor was the value of the package was based on the weight. Like how much stuff can you pack into it? I was at a J. Abraham seminar back in 1989. Many of you know the name. All right. He later hired me to teach his proteges how to sell. Well, there was an UPS kiosk in the hotel right outside the room because there were 2 huge boxes of stuff and you couldn't take it on the plane. You had to ship it. And that was part of the justification for look at all this stuff. 30 years later, when I moved out of my house, I still had stuff in those boxes I never opened. So the point is, more is not better. In many cases, less is more. I'm going to show you why that's true. So when you see the bonus stacking, $57,000 worth of stuff for $4.95, your antenna has to go up and say, why are they giving me all this stuff I may not use to get me to buy the stuff I will use? So think about that and think about your own offerings. Are you offering a lot of stuff that actually is beyond what you need to get the job done? But by adding more, you're thinking, I'm going to add value. Actually, anything that you add that doesn't enhance the package, facilitate the result, actually takes away. It distracts. Okay. So I had to go off on that slight rant there because that's one of the areas that really bugs me.
But it's a great example of how things have changed. Back in Jay Abraham's day isn't necessarily what works today. And that's a lot of what we're seeing is today's buyers are so savvy. They know this stuff. And yes, maybe the marketer's formula worked. I'm sure it did 20 years ago. Everything worked back then. The gold rush of the internet, you could say pretty much anything and sell online. But to still use those same tactics? No, not today. You need the levers that we're going to be talking about, which is very different from this formula. And I don't even want to call it a formula because it looks to me more like a recipe, right? You put all these things in there, and I use this recipe myself. Everything I'm saying, I've already done and tried and had a problem with. I was told these are the ingredients, and I would use them all, and then they wouldn't work. And I'd ask the marketer, and they say, well, you're supposed to do social proof first and then scarcity. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't work either. Oh, well, you're supposed to use more liking here. So it's not really a formula. It's like grandma's recipe. Grandma makes the greatest cookies ever. Nobody knows how she made them. If you ask her, she'll say, well, I used a pinch of this and a dash of this and 2 measures of flour. And you're like, okay, well, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a recipe. A formula works every time. But the question was, where does this recipe came from? Where did these terms come from? Why are we still using the same things 20 years later? Well, I think we already kind of spilled the beans on this. It comes from a single book called Influence, written in 1984 by Robert Cialdini. I met Cialdini years ago when I was a graduate student in psychology. He was a hero to all of us there at Purdue. But even at that time, he said, I don't think anyone's read my book yet. This is 5 years after he published it. He's like, I don't think anyone's read this book. But somebody did at some point. I don't know which marketer, when it was, where it was. They opened up this book to the table of contents, and they probably said, Eureka, here it is. Here's how we persuade people to buy our stuff. The terms look familiar, right? Scarcity, authority, liking, social proof. The formulas, air quotes, that we use is the table of contents of Dr. Cialdini's book. But look at the first chapter, weapons of influence. And he used that word particularly. He said these are powerful psychological principles that create automatic, mindless compliance. That is, when you apply social proof correctly, people will say yes. You apply liking correctly, people say yes. It just triggers this psychological need. He called them weapons. So to the extent that you're using social proof and liking and authority, and people aren't automatically saying yes to you every time, it means we're doing them wrong. And that's what the author said himself. That's when I met Mitch, and I was just so thrilled to hear that we have a problem. As my teens would say, ruh-roh, we have a problem. We've been using these principles for years. The author of the book, the one who created these, says we're doing them wrong. That's what he told Mitch in 2011. And he called those people smugglers of influence, not a very nice name. And in fact, when you use those same principles incorrectly, it has the opposite effect. I was told to use the formula to attract people, to get people to buy, to bring people into your orbit. When you use them wrong, it actually does the opposite. And we have found this in the data, and we found this from what Cialdini said. It makes people not trust you and far less likely to buy. That's why your buyers aren't buying, using the weapons of influence as a formula. So we've mentioned smugglers. We'll just give a formal definition here, right from Cialdini's book, just so we have some foundation. He says a smuggler is somebody who counterfeits these principles, authority, social proof, scarcity, liking, and brings them into a situation where they don't exist. And to stacking them using authority and social proof and scarcity. These are weapons of influence. You only need one weapon, right? You don't need to bring 4 and 5 and 6 weapons against your people. That's why it feels icky, a scientific word there. It feels icky, it feels salesy, it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel like you, because you're using multiple psychological weapons on your prospects. And I did it myself, and I'm just, I'm my moment of shame here, because I did this for 2 or 3 years, just not knowing just not, putting it together. But as Cialdini said, smuggling benefits the seller. The buyer is unreceptive to future sales. So even if you have success, air quotes, you got somebody to purchase, it's often a one-time sale. It's often somebody who wants their money back in 30 days. These are triggers meant to get an immediate yes. They're not meant to build a relationship. They never were. That was not the point of these principles. So I just put a couple of examples here. This actually comes from the training materials of a marketer. If I mentioned their name, you know who it was, I bet. But look at how they describe how to use these weapons. First, you want to hit scarcity, and then liking, and then you hit the authority, and then the social proof. You can use all of those triggers. No, that's what Cialdini said don't do. That's what you don't want to do. And so I've asked people for almost 2 years now that question that you were asked before this event here. After you registered, we asked you, well, how does this make you feel? How do you react when somebody sells to you stacking these principles? Or in this other way that another expert digital marketer teaches right from his training materials. In this one, he's talking about a video. You want to hit authority and then reciprocity, and then you're going to build social proof, and then scarcity comes into play. No, that's stacking the principles. So when we asked you before this event, how does that make you feel? When somebody uses these principles on you, here's the data. And I often show the aggregated data over a couple of years, but the numbers don't change that much. This is what everyone sitting in this audience now who registered for the webinar, we just put your responses together. When asked that question, 48% of you said it makes you want to not buy. Over 40% said you found it annoying. It was a waste of your time. 40% said it lowers your opinion of the person using the tactics. And a third said it was too much high pressure. Well, this is devastating, right? That only 7% of you said, it's okay. This is what we need to sell. I'm okay with it. That means 93% of you are not okay with it. So we feel we've been misled here. The tactics we're told, this is how you attract people and you get people to buy, actually repels people. It repels 92% of your audience. Or if you do get a success, it's often a one-time buy. So that's the problem that Mitch and I wanted to point out here, is that these, what we call levers, not weapons, they're not taught correctly. They're used as weapons. It feels manipulative. Your audience feels uncomfortable when you're doing the social proof and the scarcity and the urgency. You're actually messing with dark psychology. That's a topic for another day. I could rant on that forever, but that's the actual source of where these terms came from. And as we found over the last couple of years, repels more than 90% of your audience. The success you get is short-lived. So that's the problem. The solution, and Mitch already alluded to it, is be a detective. And a detective, and again, we'll just use the definition from the book, is one who uncovers the principles that naturally occur in a selling situation. You want to persuade somebody to say yes. You look for the principle that naturally occurs. So what lever can you use to move your people to a yes? Now, I often use authority. That's my one lever. If I'm speaking in something that I'm an expert about, I'll use authority. I'll say, hey, look at all these fancy diplomas on my wall. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've gathered 96 million data points from 550 organizations. I've seen how this works, and I've seen people in the same problem. I think this is the solution for you. That's it. I don't use scarcity and commitment and consistency and liking. So that's what a detective does. Now, if I was talking about how to improve your golf swing or how to become a better lover, I would not use authority. I'd pick another principle, but I use authority in my area of expertise. And when you do that, it feels good. I don't know how else to say it. Your audience appreciates that because it feels authentic. It looks authentic. You look confident and comfortable. and you become what Mitch calls the trusted voice. That is because it's from being authentic. You don't stack the principles, you don't counterfeit them as a smuggler does. And the result is you get more yeses. And that's what we want. So
Can I intervene here?
absolutely.
So go back one slide. There's another factor here, and that's what one of the things that we're going to teach and really kind of drill is two parts to this. One is knowing which of the influence principles best highlights your particular skill, value, etc. All right. So one of the things that's very important is for you to do a self-assessment, and sometimes hard to do on your own because we tend to undervalue rather than overvalue. The other thing is one of the main what I'll call a tool or a model is to shift from telling people to asking people. So what I find in the years that I've worked, very often you can find out from the buyer or the person you're talking to, what is it that they value? So in other words, there's something known as buying criteria. When you start asking people what they're looking for, how they make a decision, what they look for in a service provider, they will actually give you clues or tell you outright, I'm looking for somebody with product knowledge. I'm looking for somebody who's already done it for other people. I'm looking for somebody who cares about me. They like me. I'm looking for somebody who will give me real value for my time. So in other words, by understanding the person's buying motivation, you can sometimes kind of connect that to the influence principle that would most affect the conversation, and then determine if you have that or those. And if you don't, then how do you use your influence in other ways? Okay. Small distinction, but a big difference.
Yes. And that's just, Mitch had already mentioned detective school. These are the sorts of things that we present there. But I think you might already understand the reason we created this detective school. Another big reason, just to kind of put this all into one theme, is that this notion of weapons of influence, that all the smugglers, all the marketers, and many who don't even realize, I call them smuggler lights, because I've met many of these good-hearted people who just say, well, this is what we have to use. They're all following the original book. That's the 1984 book that's shown on the left there. This is the table of contents. Cialdini calls these weapons. On the right is his newest version of the book. And notice a big change here, levers of influence. And at first, when I saw this, I thought, maybe it's just, we're in that era, guns are bad, and, he's, using a different word. But Mitch and I were talking, I was like, no, he's trying to make a distinction here between those who have been using the principles incorrectly all these years and how they should be used as a detective to move your people to a yes decision. And you'll notice there's also a bonus principle he adds, unity, which I haven't yet seen. It's something not found in the Smugglers formula. So that's the levers of true influence to get you to yes, are those 7 levers: reciprocity, liking, authority, and the rest. And we want to distinguish that from the smuggler's recipe, which uses usually about 5 of these. What's often missing is commitment and consistency. That's actually one of the levers, not usually taught. Unity, which is the newest one, which hasn't even shown up on the horizon yet. And also there are some false weapons that they use. Urgency, of course, is a big way to persuade people. That's not a lever. That's not a psychological principle. Cialdini would call it scarcity of time, because scarcity is far stronger than urgency. And the bonus stacking that Mitch loves so much, also not a psychological principle, as he described. So very different between the smuggler's recipe and the 7 levers that we teach in detective school. So let's introduce one last term, and then we'll bid adieu to Dr. Cialdini. But he has a phrase that Mitch had mentioned, bunglers. And that simply means somebody who doesn't know those principles. They don't know what levers to use. They don't know the background, which was me for quite a few years. I was like, well, I was taught this, but I'm not really sure. I didn't know where it came from. And by not knowing that, you actually miss an opportunity to help someone and help yourself, a win-win. Somebody has a problem that you could address with your product or service, but you just didn't know which lever to use at which time. You didn't know what your strengths were. You missed the opportunity and they say no. That's a loss for you and a loss for them. So Cialdini would call them a bungler. So to put this into an example, that I often use is with reciprocation. The marketers call it reciprocity. That's not the word in the book. It's reciprocation. But I use this example to show you the power of these levers because they're deep inside us. And so I use the example, imagine if you're, you get a call from a friend who says, hey, Mitch, I know you're busy. I went to pick up your kids or grandkids from school. I'm going to bring them over to soccer practice. Just thought I'd save you some time and do that. But what's our reaction? It's usually, oh, thank you. I'll pick up your kids from soccer tomorrow. Oh, I'll take your kids to the game tomorrow. That is, they did something for you, and automatically it comes to us that we have this debt to repay. That they did a favor for us. They picked up our kids or grandkids. They brought them somewhere. They saved us time. And we're like, well, how can I help you? My wife and I go to a friend's house. We've gone there several times, and we'll bring flowers or a bottle of wine. Happens the same thing every time we hand her the bottle of wine or the flowers. She's looking around the room. Oh, here, take this, take that. It's a sense of reciprocity, a sense of indebtedness that she feels obligated to repay. That's the power of the principle if you use it to get this response. So keep that in mind, because we're going to talk about how to bungle reciprocity. Because when I see reciprocity taught by the marketers, it's often paired up with the free gift, right? Now, I've used the free gift myself. That's, does it work? Well, it might work. It might get people familiar with you. But I would argue it is not reciprocity, because reciprocity has that automatic mindless compliance. Oh, you did this for me? Here, let me do something for you. And I'll tell you, in all the years of me putting free gifts on my website, I have never had anyone call me up and say, hey, Doc, thank you for that free gift. I can't tell you how much that means to me. What can I do for you? It doesn't have that reaction. And the reason? Because we've already made them do all the work. There's no sense of obligation. So when they teach reciprocity means the free gift, the person visiting your website has to first make the decision, should I give you my name and email? They do. They check their inbox. They have to double opt in. They go to a website. They say yes. They download the PDF. That's a lot of work. They already did all the work, and then they get the free gift. So you see, there's no sense of indebtedness there. So that's one way we bungle reciprocity. Does it work for something? Yes. Does it work because it's reciprocity? No, there's not that overpowering sense of indebtedness. So that's one example of how you can bungle an opportunity to get somebody to say yes. So we thought we put these terms, we mentioned a bunch of these terms, detective and smuggler and bungler, just put them into a matrix. This is helpful for me. I'm a picture kind of guy, but hopefully this will help you remember these and to see where you are in this matrix. Of course, you want to be a detective. You want to be able to use these levers properly to get people to say yes, to create this overpowering sense of indebtedness and this automatic mindless compliance. So I'm just going to guide you right through these this grid. So a detective is somebody who is high. They're on the right side of the scale. They are high in skill. They understand the influence principles. They know how to use the levers. They know what their strengths are, which levers to use in which situations. And at the same time, on the left, you can see they're relationship focused. They are looking for how to build long-term relationships with their people. They're authentic. That's why they're a detective. That's why they have the most success. There's another group that also understands the principles very well, but they are focused on the transaction. So we call those people smugglers, because they are using the principles as weapons, not as levers. And they're interested in the sale. To many of them, it's a game. You know, how many people can I get to click or buy? It's not focused on the long term. So I know none of you here are smugglers, but I was a bungler. That is, I felt like I had a good heart. I wanted to build relationships, but I just didn't know the principles. I was low on the principle side. You don't want to be there either. And we're going to introduce one last term because this quadrant seems kind of incomplete. And that term is the muddler. And the muddler is somebody who learned from the smuggler, as I did. I was squarely in this quadrant, learns from the smuggler, tries to apply it, and it doesn't work. Why? Because the smuggler doesn't tell you everything. So I would use all what I learned from the smugglers, apply it. I couldn't get people to open my emails or buy my stuff. What is wrong here? It's because I was muddling. So what happens in this quadrant is you'll sit there a while. It doesn't feel good. It feels icky. What you end up doing then, like I did, is you say, well, I've had enough of selling in this way. I'm going to sell in my own authentic way. And what do? You simply move up on the left side. You still have low knowledge of it. You still don't understand the principles. That's not where I want to be. That's not where you want to be. So to move from a muddler to a bungler in the quadrant is to move from somebody selling kind of salesy to someone who's selling authentically, but you're still not getting great outcomes. You're still on the frustration side. So the solution is be a detective. We'll say that a bunch of times, to move from those quadrants to the detective side, to learn the influence levers, when to use them, how to use them, and to do them in an authentic way. Then you have all the success that you want. So this is kind of a snapshot moment. If there was a takeaway, it's right here. That's the main point of our briefing. Be a detective and move out of these other quadrants where you're just not getting the success that you want and deserve. So be a detective, as it's been said. They're more knowledgeable than the bunglers, more skilled than the muddlers, and far more ethical than the smugglers, more successful than all three. So that's our message. And there's only 3 actions to be a detective. One is to learn how to use the levers correctly and effectively. Know when to use them, how to use them, which ones are your strengths, and then to move people through, yes, with what we call influencer conversations at each stage of the customer experience. And we'll give you an example of each of these. These are ones that we use in detective school.